Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So I have not been really drawing in my sketchbook lately. I've been doing a lot more digital work. I think it's mostly this time due to art fight, but at least every Monday we can always come back and do some traditional art. So today I wanted to do some more alcohol marker drawing, but I am not going to be doing the same thing where I kind of like preemptively put a piece of sticker paper on the backside. I want to see how well the markers blend again without having some sort of material not allowing the paper to fully absorb the ink right away. Because I think when I was working on the Moriko page, I think last week, I found that the ink was not really absorbing quite nicely. So let's see if there is a difference. But to kind of start off, I was kind of having troubles with my pencil that I like to use for sketching if I'm using like multiple colors or if I'm using any of the I think it's the 0.5 for this particular pencil. If I'm using the Pilot Color Eno, I use 0.7 because that's what the barrel takes in. But I thought it'd be fun to sketch out a very cute little drink for my OC Kaisen. I just had one or a few, I guess, like recommended to me on Pinterest when I was just browsing, and I forgot. I usually keep a bunch of references, so I might have accidentally clicked one recently, and I like drawing like little chibis with just cute, colorful drinks for like stickers and acrylic charms. Maybe if I remember, I'll put some on the screen for you guys to see. In terms of the footage, I did end up speeding up the sketching portion just because I am using the photo light blue type of color for the sketching, and it's very hard for my camera to pick up, especially in a brighter room. So unless the light's not intensely on my sketchbook, I can actually like tilt it and you guys can see it a little bit better, which I'll show you towards the end of the sketching session. But while I'm doing the sketching, I thought it'd just be easier for me to breeze through it so you guys don't have to see pretty much like very blurry lines at this point. I do have Kaisen at the very top of my little cup drink here, and I thought it'd be fun to do it in alcohol markers just because I don't remember doing this kind of like drink aesthetic with alcohol markers before. I think I might have done it with colored pencils, maybe as a test or something, and then I've definitely done it with watercolors and I've done it digitally as well. So I thought it'd be fun just to do it with alcohol markers because the colors are nice and bright. We can do a lot of blending and a lot of layering. So let's see how it goes. So here is the sketch. Hopefully you can see a little bit better. I have the cup taking up a good portion of the page, and then I have Kaisen kind of like hanging off the ledge of the back of the cup, and he's kind of grabbing towards the straw. But in terms of how I want to approach this, I will be doing line art first, as I typically do with alcohol markers. I did pick a lighter color, so I'm sticking with purple, and it's mostly because I wanted something slightly warmish. So I didn't want to go full on blue, and I kind of associate Kaisen with blue and purple, and I knew I wanted the drink to be more of like a blueberry pea flower. I think it's not pea flower, butterfly pea flower, I think, where it's like more of that natural pigment of blue. And it's funny enough because I actually recorded this before streaming on Sunday, and one of you guys were actually drinking a butterfly pea tea, I think, and I was trying to figure out which kind of like tea or kind of like floral type of leaf or flower that naturally has that blue color. I know there's like blue spirulina, I think cooks also use to like tint things to be more of like a blue hue, but I've definitely seen butterfly pea flower being very bright blue, so I'm pretty sure something similar probably for this drink, unless it's like, you know, colored food dye or something like that. But I definitely wanted a blue theme for his drink. I think it'd be also cute to do some other ones for my other OCs to kind of like pick a color palette and potentially kind of like curate a drink. This one was based off of one that I've seen in the past, and I think I've used a very similar one for maybe Marius from Tears of Themis, but his is predominantly purple. This one I wanted it to be blue just because I like the color blue a little bit more, and I wanted to play around with more of the blue markers. I think some of the colors, definitely for alcohol markers, there's ones that I gravitate towards. I've done a lot of ones, I think, that have more greens for sure, kind of peach tones, and sometimes leaning towards blue-ish, but I've definitely done like a lot of purples and sometimes green. So I wanted to branch out and just work with more predominantly kind of like a cooler blue for the color palette so that I can also just use up more of my colors. Maybe in the future, I think it could be fun to do one for Koji and kind of have like a gradation type of drink and maybe have like blue decoration so that we can kind of have his whole entire color palette. Because I think it would be neat to have like a yellow to orange to red, and that makes up a good portion of his color palette, and then have like pops of blue somehow in the drink. Could be fun. I think I've done some for 17 as well in the past, but drinks are just kind of fun because you can play around with like gradations, you can play around with like ingredients within the cup. Also, the glare from the cup could be fun, the shape of the cup. You can add like a straw, an umbrella, or you can add like mint leaves or stuff in it, and it's just kind of fun to like curate a drink, low-key. But also for me, I like making the drink super colorful, so if I can kind of play around with a little bit of the transparency, that's kind of like my goal. Typically make things actually look like they're within the liquid. So yeah, here's the line art basically finished though. And I think if you noticed while I was doing the line art, I did a lot of broken lines and a lot of like dashes and dots because I was not too sure if I wanted to really commit to any harsh lines right away. The only ones that I kept very much like dark and very in your face is Kaisen's line, as well as like the bottom of the base of the cup. But we are going to be moving on to doing the coloring. So I'm going to knock out Kaisen's colors right away as he's not exactly the focal point of the drink. So I decided that I'll just do this also in time lapse, and I kept the coloring pretty simple. Not very, I don't know. I just don't really like my coloring for chibis when I do it traditionally with alcohol markers. I don't know if it's because I don't really plan out maybe my gradations properly, or I don't leave enough like white space for it to feel like it really pops out, or I just need to adjust my line art so that there's more contrast. There is something that I just dislike about how I draw my chibis with alcohol markers, so I'm not too sure if they just appear too flat, but I think Kaisen turned out pretty okay, and then we are obviously going to spend more of my efforts on the drink itself because that's what the main portion of like what I wanted to draw for today. So yeah, if you guys wish to see me design more drinks for the rest of my OCs, just let me know and I'll definitely consider them. I might do different ones for different mediums maybe. I think it'd be fun to revisit doing watercolors or maybe like a mixed media one. We could do acrylic markers or like gouache or something. Could be fun to just play around with. And I guess like other than trying to cover up a lot of like bleed through with like the marker paper, or not the marker paper, the sticker paper. I tend to get those mixed up, but it'd be nice to use like some other different mediums and maybe just paste them into my sketchbook instead. So I'm not limited to the mediums on the sticker paper. Though it could be neat to see how watercolor reacts on the sticker paper, so maybe that's something I can definitely test out in the future as well. So even though Kaisen kind of is more, I think, purple leaning in terms of his color palette, I do incorporate a lot of blue, and because I knew I was going to include a lot of blue in this color palette in general, I tried my best to give him a little bit pops of blue within like his black attire and his hair as well. But I also forgot, because I did the line art in purple, his eyes ended up being purple even though they are supposed to be blue as well. I ended up doing kind of like the derpy way, how I like to do eyes, which is just leave a very blank center for the pupil and then darken up these kind of like upper half of the eyes just to give it a little bit more dimension and a little bit more color towards the bottom of their eyes. So in this case, Kaisen's eyes are not really accurate. Would have been nice to keep them blue so that there's more continuity with the color palette, but I just kind of forgot when I was doing the line art. But moving on to the coloring portion for the drink. So I started off with a very light kind of like minty green just to lay down some color for our ice, as well as potentially like planning out where I wanted to keep some of our glare on our glass. I could have went with like a full vertical band on the glass, but I think I started off with the color a little bit too quick, so I will end up adding white a little bit later to pull out a little bit more of that glare on the glass. But for now, I ended up doing as much of a gradation as I can every so often. So I tried my best to keep the objects for the most part look like they're within the drink, but I don't want to make like anything look like they're too faded, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna try my best to balance both of those out. And because I had line art already kind of like set out, there's not really too much blurring I could do to get rid of an object, but there's a lot of space for me to add things. So later on, when I start working on like the little blueberries, I will take kind of like a mid-tone blue and add some in to our background of our drink so that it looks like they're further away. And then as we get closer to, I guess, like the edge of our cups, the edge of our cup, singular, we can have some that are a little bit more in focus. Therefore, they're a little bit darker because they're probably closer to the edge of the glass rather than being submerged in our blue liquid. The green leaves were kind of fun. I kind of wish I made them a little bit more darker to push a little bit of the contrast, but they were very easy to blend in terms of how I colored them. And I think, I don't know, the shine looks very cute on the one that's kind of like bending over the cup. I kind of wish I added a little bit more of a shadow where the leaf is covering the edge of the cup so it looks like it's bending over rather than being like flat on top, if that makes sense. But I think the green being with inside the drink just helps bring a little bit more color. Otherwise, we would be a little bit too monochromatic. And I tried my best. I'm not too sure how well it's going to show up to add a little bit more of the green to the edges of the cup and just like lower and deeper into the blue so that we have a little more of that color being dispersed throughout the entirety of the drink rather than having it just be a concentration of blue at the very bottom. And I think the blueberries were very fun to color, so I definitely did not make them as like purpley as they do appear in real life. By no means is this very much like a realistic depiction of an actual drink by any means. The cup is very stylized, the blueberries are too, the leaves, the straw and everything, but still kind of fun to just play around with some of the colors and just make a fun drink for your OCs. But I don't know. I don't know if this would be like a type of drink he would like. I think I've already alluded in his particular reference sheet that he does drink alcohol. So I feel like he's more of like drinks some sort of alcohol, maybe cocktail or something like that. Maybe something fruity. I don't know. I'm not too sure. I'm not too well versed in alcohol. I don't really drink myself. I drink like maybe one drink in a social event if I'm around my friends who I trust. Otherwise, I strictly don't drink. So, because I don't like the taste of alcohol and I don't really care for the buzz or anything. But they do have very pretty drinks, so I like it for the eye candy only, pretty much. But for the bottom of our cup, I like to keep this kind of like more concentrated with our deeper colors. So oftentimes because I guess it's more like a stylization for myself. It's kind of like more dense of the glass. So it has a lot of the colors that tend to sink towards like the center bottom being reflected as well as anything on the table or the surface. But I like to take advantage of this and just make the bottom kind of like really shiny and much more darker typically than the drink that I have. And this way it just makes sure it's that kind of like the material looks a little bit different, and I just like the shinier aspect of the bottom of the glass compared to the rest, since usually there's just too much going on. But if you get this far in the video, let me know what is your favorite drink to consume versus your favorite drink that you think is just like looks pretty. Or if you have like a flavor, or I guess like a flavor profile, I guess, that might represent your favorite OC or something, because I think that could be fun. I've always associated Masaki with like matcha for the most part. He likes like matcha desserts, so I would assume he would like that kind of drink. Even though he has a sweet tooth, he probably just likes anything that has plenty amount of sugar. Kaisen, I already mentioned, he drinks like probably alcohol. He probably drinks like soda drinks and stuff, or maybe something a little bit more low key. I don't know too much about my other OCs. I think Koji is probably like juice and pop for the most part. I feel like Akemi is just like water and coffee. Sato might be maybe also water and coffee, or she might be like a tea girly, and then Moriko is more of like energy drink and coffee, caffeine bouncing off the wall girly, because she has like a lot of energy, but I feel like she would consume anything with caffeine maybe. Because this kind of like drawing where I drew them as like a little chibi with the drink kind of reminds me of what I did for Inktober last year. And I did like different themes for all of my OCs, but one of them was like sweet treats, and a lot of the drawings that I did for some of my OCs were like drink based. I think almost all of them were, except for Kaisen, because I couldn't really think of anything that was like low-key visually appealing and not on the super sweet side that had more of like the fall flavors. So unless I went for like something super simple, maybe something that's like a warmer alcohol. So maybe he would have preferred that, but I gave him like Harvest Trail Mix or something. I feel like he would like something savory or like salty or something rather than like a sweet treat per se. But back to the process. So I ended up covering a lot of the little bubbles and like just like any shiny portion of our cup, so the glare again, with the blue, because I wanted to get a nice smooth gradation from the bottom of the cup to our edges and to the top. So I ended up just covering everything, so it kind of makes sure that things look like they're within the drink rather than me avoiding the objects and coloring around them, which means that I lost a lot of white areas. So I went back with an acrylic marker, and I'm using the Artex Sim Tap markers. This one just has a nice point. The markers are also very juicy, so I am able to get like finer lines, and they're quite opaque. So I ended up adding in backer bubbles to kind of give it a little bit more of like, it just seems more fun. In my opinion, it also looks a little bit more cute. And then added back in some of the glare, kind of fixed up Kaisen a little bit. I'll also add some glare to our right side of our drink cup so that it just doesn't look too flat on one side or the other. And it also just helps push things more to the back if I have like a streak of white kind of covering the objects, just to give it a little bit more depth. Then, last but not least, I added a little bit of like, I was gonna say sweat droplets, but your drink's not exactly sweating. So the condensation from like how cold the cup is, I decided to add some of those droplets here and there. So to kind of like draw them out, I ended up doing kind of like a white curve with a highlight in the center. Then I brought back our alcohol markers so that we can fill in some of the shadows and some darker areas just to give it a little bit more body. And I think this is what our drink ended up looking like. But last but not least, with alcohol markers and typically a lighter line art, I like to kind of put a little bit more contrast and bring everything out a little bit more by giving it a pop of some sort of darker line art. So I went back and grabbed my Energel Klena with the black ink to do our outlines again. So I chose black only because I knew if I chose a dark blue, it might not stand out enough. I do have a blue ink or like a blue black ink from the Energel Klena, so I could have used that, but Kaisen's clothing is on the darker side and I did want him to pop a little bit more, so it'd be easier for me to just use straight up black on our drink. And I think it worked really well when I was doing Moriko's drawing. I do have her in front of me, so I could just quickly take a look. Yeah, I like how the black makes things really stand out, especially with the line art being significantly darker for the most part. But I'm keeping still a lot of those broken lines, and I end up not outlining everything. So typically, if I'm using a darker line art to kind of accentuate some contrast, I don't want to add too much of it everywhere. I'm not re-outlining everything. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose of having the lighter line art in the first place. But I decided to outline most of Kaisen. And then when we're doing the cup, I ended up doing the outline a little bit, some of the base of the cup. But then anything within, I mostly gave either just like the depth of certain corners, a little bit more contrast, but I did a lot more like broken lines because I don't want to accidentally pull too many things to the front by giving them such a harsh line look. Otherwise, it will read flat again and it kind of just breaks that depth. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. I want anything to be more forward facing to have darker lines. Anything that should be in towards the back or being like within something should have less of that harsh contrasted line look. But I tried my best to give Kaisen enough of the contrast because he definitely needed a little bit more sprucing up here and there. I also noticed that I missed 2 areas for line art, so apologies to Kaisen. And he's kind of like barely hanging on for dear life for the most part. But I think it turned out pretty cute. I did miss doing these kind of like little drink illustrations. So yeah, maybe I'll do one more in the future. You guys can let me know which of one of my OCs you would like me to design like a little drink for. Also at the end, I was trying to see if there was a comparison between the blending for Moriko and kind of the blending for this. So I think I am not gonna in the future preemptively put down sticker paper because I think it blends a lot better without having that sticky surface on the back. But I will still use the sticker paper to cover up bleed through in the future, and I'll fill this page with something. I don't know quite yet, but maybe in the future I'll do something with it. But for now, I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!